cars.
Imagine a brand new Corvette gets sold to the cartel, and then you have to figure out how to recover it.
Did you recover it? For me, like success is the ability to just show up and spend time doing things that you want to be doing. Keep trying things and just showing up day in and day out. Not everyone in the world could be a billionaire. Not everyone can be the exact same in terms of success, and whether that's financial or whatever it may be. So I always battled with just like, why do I think I could do this?
This guy's a bully in his company, bro.
Man.
All of his employees hate him, Joe.
Yeah, they all file lawsuits against him, bro, on a weekly basis.
Did you ever go to court?
No, I was in Japan. Dude, my man, I appreciate you for hopping on the show, dude. Yeah. This is gonna be a lot of fun.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So I wanna go through. You know, I didn't really mention to them what like I wanted to talk about, so they're kind of finding out last minute.
Welcome.
But I know BB had his notepad going, so he's done his research. But
I don't know what you're talking about.
I love these type of podcasts because I've been getting homies who I've known since they kind of started their journey. Kind of like you already were on the way, but you were very, very much in the beginning of your time of like when we first met. Yeah. And it's so cool to be sitting in front of you now after like everything you've accomplished, and you're still very young, like 23 years old, which is like,
thank you, man. Yeah,
which is like insane.
I feel young. Hopefully, I still feel that way forever.
yeah, I hope so too, man. You've changed a lot too. Got the long hair, and then
for sure.
So there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about. I want to go through just so you guys are on the same page. I want to definitely go through like your journey, and like I want to learn about like the key influences in your life. That's like a big thing for me. You're a master networker, so I definitely want to dive into that. I'm sure you've been told that many times. I want to talk more about like actual strategies you took, and then your projects today, and then kind of also like your journey, because you've changed so much, not just from like a business perspective, but you had literally a whole physical transformation. I mean, like someone who met you like 4 or 5 years ago would probably not recognize you today.
Night and day, for sure.
Yeah, that's crazy. So are you guys on board with that? That's kind of...
Yeah, but before we start with all that, how did you guys meet? How do you guys get to talk and stuff like that?
Yeah, so you were telling me. So we met in Arizona when I had an event back in, what was it, probably 2019?
Yeah.
2020?
Yeah.
And then, were you living in California then?
I was in California.
Okay. And then, I had a company called Build Your Empire, which is an events company, and we did a lot of like social media stuff, had this big audience, and we were doing a lot of these masterminds and just in-person events, bringing speakers. So that was really the first endeavor of mine after high school. I got into this whole world of business, social media when I was 16, and Build Your Empire came about when I was 18, and then a month after I graduated high school, moved out to Arizona to run this company, and that's when we started doing the events out there with my former business partner, Kieran, who I was just having lunch with and catching up with. We all moved out together from Virginia, but yeah, you can tell your side of the story in terms of like, you came to the event, we met, and then you were there in my life at some of the most critical moments during that time. Like my interview with Larry King, you were there. I talk about that literally
it was very random
once a week in terms of like that impact of that day and that interview from a social perspective, from like a personal perspective. But I've had my podcast for 6 years, and people always ask me like, what's your favorite interview or most influential? It's always Larry King one. And like the fact that you were there experiencing that, it was such a small crew there. It's super cool to reflect on.
Yeah, that's
it was really funny because as I was like doing a little bit of research to like, get some good questions to ask you, this guy's sitting over my shoulder. He goes, "You see that picture? I took that picture. Oh, you see that picture? I took that picture." I'm like, dude, I don't care. I'm trying to do some research.
That's great.
That's hilarious, dude. Oh my god. Yeah, no. Basically, man, when you started Build Your Empire, I don't know how I ran into your account. I think I followed you through like some sort of mutual friend, and at the time I was just starting my career, and I was like, okay, cool. Like you were probably the first young kid in the space, so I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. I was kind of like following your stuff, and then you once posted, you're like, I remember clearly how this went down. I saw your story. You're like, oh, we're having an event like tomorrow. Like, come down. Like, whoever got like last minute tickets or whatever, something like that. And then I remember thinking, I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm over here sitting like, I want to build a network. I want to talk to people. Yeah. Why don't I just go? So like, I hit up my friend. I call him. It was literally 6 p.m. in the afternoon. I swear you not, man. And it was next day your event.
Wow.
And I go, hey, bro, what are you doing? He goes, nothing. His name is Jack. Shout out to Jack, man. If you're watching this, I love you, bro. Day one. But I was like, hey, are you up going to Arizona tomorrow? And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, bro. Like early morning, like 5 a.m. We'll just go to Arizona. Like I got this got going on. We'll have a lot of fun. Remember Jackie used to play the piano. You met him.
Oh yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah. So yeah, he was the guy that came with me. So he's like, oh, I'm down. So we literally just took the car, drove all the way to your house.
Oh my god.
And I remember too, like thinking like, I don't know you. You don't know me. And there was like probably like 100 people there.
Yeah.
So in my head, I'm like, how the hell am I gonna like get in front of this guy, right? So you know what I did? After we were done with the whole event, I come up to him, I'm like, yo, Casey, I'm starving. I'm about to order a pizza. What do you want? Like, that's literally what I said. And he was like, oh, a pizza? Oh, sick. Yeah, I'm down. Let's just order this. So I ordered a whole thing. So I ended up staying with his like inner circle, inner crew. Everybody left, and it was just his friends. And he's like, yo, Adam bought us pizza. Let's have fun and eat. Yeah. And that's literally
Adam.
Talk about like a good strategy though. Like whether it was intentional or not, really right? Smart. It's like reflecting on that. It's so cool to hear it continue.
No, I intentionally did that 100% because I was. And by the way, I was thinking about it because I was sitting probably 5 rows back. And so while you're like doing the whole thing, everyone's talking, I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to stay here after everybody leaves? Yeah. Because like, or else like this whole trip, I mean, I met cool people, but my main thing was like, I wanted to connect with you, you know? And I was like, you know what? Everybody loves pizza. And I'll tell you how I know this. So I ran for president of my student body in college when I was back in 2015, 2014. And I won with like thousands of votes. And my main strategy was just pizza. It's like,
so this has been a theme in your life.
Yeah, no, I feel like people bond over food, dude. Like,
100%.
Yeah. So I came out to him and I was like, hey, and I didn't like ask if he wanted it. I was like very specific in like how I delivered it. I was like, yo, I'm about to order some pizza. What do you and your boys want? Yeah. And then he goes, oh, that's sick. You know?
Works.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So it's like for major corporations, it's like, why give someone like a promotion when you could just give them a pizza party?
literally. You know what I'm saying? One of my buddies, Colby, says this all the time. It's like, if you think about history as well, like everything happened over like breaking bread, having conversations like at a dinner, and you know, you see these historic photos. They're at a table. It's breaking bread and having those conversations with an intimate crew is like to be able to be in those rooms, whether it was that or other things that have happened in all of our lives. It's a powerful place to be if you can put yourself in those rooms with people that are there for a reason.
Yeah. To be fair, though, you were epic. Yeah. To be fair, then man, he was very open with open arms. He was like, "Yo, yeah, come through." And I remember it was you, a couple other homies, and I stayed till like I think 11 or midnight or something, and then we had a hotel, so just slept real quick. Woke up at 6 a.m. and drove back. I actually got pulled over too, bro.
No way.
I swear to God. So me and my friend, we were like, we made a joke on the way there. We're like, imagine you get pulled over out of state, because like I haven't had a ticket in years. Oh my God. And literally on the way back to Cali, I get rolled for going too fast, I guess. And I'm like, what? I'm in a Camry. How can I go like? But yeah, that was the story.
That's great.
Yeah. So that was kind of crazy. But like from your perspective, man, you work interestingly. I just got to tell you that. And what I mean by that is like you kind of work in the shadows, and all of a sudden like boop, like you just pop out of nowhere with something, right? Which is super cool. Yeah. But I've also noticed that you're like a master networker. You know how to like position yourself in areas and do certain things to be able to be valuable for everybody. Where did you learn that from? And who was like your main, like I guess I would say mentor in like assisting you to like understand how to make the right moves in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, appreciate you guys having me on today. But
yeah.
You know, it's crazy because like even reflecting on that journey in my life of like 2019, 2020, it's 2023 now as of this recording, it feels like a lifetime ago. And I think for me too, like when I think back from, like, and for the context for everyone here in the audience too, when I was 16, get injured playing football, growing up in a small town in Virginia, like this world and like the path that I've been on, if you would have told me this 6 years ago, I literally wouldn't have believed it. Not to say that it couldn't have happened, but just the town I grew up in, the people that I was influenced by prior to getting injured playing football were just such a small community, where to think about like the word networking, I didn't know what that meant growing up. That never appeared in my mind, right? Or like personal branding, or like what you say, like positioning yourself in your career. Like I was the kid that grew up an athlete, played hockey for 10 years, started playing lacrosse, football in high school, and didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do after high school. Like I always, whenever someone would, you know, give you some piece of paper in school, it's like, what do you want to do? And it had all these options. I would always circle business. Didn't really know what that meant, know what direction that would go in. And then fast forward, get injured sophomore year. I was in a neck brace for 6 months, almost paralyzed.
Oh my gosh.
This super hard sort of turning point in my life. And during that 6 months, I just fell into this whole world of personal development, entrepreneurship, without knowing it at the time. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, nowadays you're on TikTok, you see someone talking about cold plunging, like, oh, that's interesting, but maybe I'll go to his profile. Then 6 months later, you have a cold plunge and you're booking like this Alaska cold plunge adventure. Like, people like, you slowly go down these rabbit holes and you don't really know where they will lead into. And that, for me, that's what happened, where it's like following people like Gary Vaynerchuk and understanding what they're talking about, but more so what they're doing. It just spoke to me. And during a time in my life when I didn't really have a direction, I was young, I had all the time in the world, I couldn't play football anymore. I just immersed myself in that world. And what ended up starting off as just like, hey, how can I make some money online? I don't have I don't have a job. I'm going on 16 years old. How can I like create this path for myself? And social media just became such an important part of my life, of learning what like Facebook advertising was and social media growth and social media marketing overall. And then that led into podcasting, which has been like the platform that I've been able to stand on all these years, in terms of, I've had the show be 6 years in December, 450 interviews that I've done almost. You were at the most important in my eyes, Larry King.
That was like,
which we'll talk about in a bit here. But I think the mentors, like to your question, I've always been just optimistic about people. And I think my perspective has changed over time, right? But when I was 16, 17, I wanted to travel and meet people and build a network. That was my like primary goal. It's like I ended up missing almost 80 days of school, senior year of high school, going to events. Like I would see events on social from people like Dan Fleischman or whoever it may be on social that I follow that I didn't really know too well at the time. But, they're doing an event in New York or Miami or LA. And I remember having to like convince my parents to let me go to these events. I'm 17 at the time. They have no right to let me just travel across the country at 17 with people they don't know. But for whatever reason, they let me go and I convinced them to do it. And for me, like those events shaped me in terms of like my thinking of not only what's possible, but just like being in the right room. So to the question of like who has influenced me, I think it's just been just like this natural evolving curiosity that I've brought into every conversation, whether that's from the podcast or from these events. Like you quickly learn, like the type of people that you gravitate towards versus the people that you want to avoid. And that might be subconsciously or consciously. But for me, like I always used to ask myself when I was 16, like, how can I find a mentor? Like, what does that mean? Is that going to be someone that holds your hand through the process? Like, what does that mean? And for me now, looking back over the last 6 years, like I've had mentors in every area of my life, some for a very short period of time, some that have been by my side and have helped me and I could bounce ideas off of for the whole, journey thus far. But I think it's, you have different mentors through these different periods of your life. When I was raising money for my last company, Mediakits, and I had a mentor there to really shepherd me through that process and understanding how to do it, to things like running a marathon and understanding like how do you think about that and what goes into that. And I think just throughout my journey, it's just been a constant evolving like curiosity machine of how can I be better? How can I bring value to people? And, trying to demonstrate that and showcase that in a social setting. Like I think all of us too, like we are always thinking, oh, how can I do better? How can I do better? And that's how I feel. That's how I felt when I was 19. And I think it's just carrying that mentality of like the day one mentality is like sort of my belief on how I live my life and how and result the actions I take.
Did you ever think I meet some people and I find it interesting because some people have this attitude of like they kind of already knew they were going to be successful at something. Was that you, or like you were like, I'll try things, hit spaghetti at the wall, see what happens?
I mean, I think success is just like genuinely, and I don't just say this and people could say it cliche, but it's like success is just showing up, right? Like if you're showing up, I have this neck brace trophy in my office at home where the neck brace that I spent 6 months in, I had this artist, Daniel Allen Cohen, who's a buddy of mine, turn it into a trophy. And there's 4 words on it. It says, keep going, never quit. And people always ask like, oh, what have you learned from all these people you've interviewed? And it's simply those 4 words, like, keep going and never quit. Like this idea of success and what it means to me. And I think what it means to a lot of people is like, there's the financial, there's the spiritual, there's the mental, like what is, however you want to define success to you. But for me, it's like, if you can keep showing up and be just constantly evolving in all aspects of your life. Like when we met, right? Success was like, oh, now I have long hair and I look the part, and thank you to my incredible fiance for helping me understand how to show up better in the world, to then like, oh, what is success from a skincare and like having to go through this intense acne journey. But for me, like success is the ability to just show up and spend time doing things that you want to be doing. Because people that, you know, as you said, like, did you believe you were going to be successful? I knew I just wouldn't quit. And when I look into the future, I just know that that's the simple ingredient for whether that's micro or macro success, is just the ability to just keep showing up and, you know, through the hardships, through the successes, through personal relationships, whatever it may be. But from an early age, I think it was just self-belief. I think self-belief and cockiness are obviously a thin line, but for me, I think it's like, how can you have a certain level of positive self-belief that you can echo into others in terms of if you're in a room, how can you make your self-belief make someone else in the room say, wow, like they believe in themselves so much to keep going, to show up day in and day out, whether that's, you know, they're dealing with hardships or they're on a roll. And I think that's, for me, always been prevalent in my life in terms of like this internal self-belief through the struggles, through the successes, and through it all thus far since I was 16, 17, and primarily from, you know, the people that I started learning from on social and in books, right? And of course it goes back to like childhood and sports, I think, as well. But no, I think it's just keep trying things and just showing up day in and day out.
Did you ever have a period? Feel free to guys to interject. In anything.
Yeah, no, I want to say one thing though.
Please.
One thing I really noticed about this whole thing was just the importance of momentum, right? Or like you were at one point, maybe your lowest point, right? Where at least in the story that you just talked about you saying that you were in a neck brace, you had no momentum. Even if you wanted to move, you legit could not move, right?
Yep.
To getting the ball rolling,
and
then getting up and getting better and then getting healthy, and then from there just keep on going and going and going. So I guess what stood out to me the most was just the importance of momentum, and especially when you just like when you talked about success being like you know, it's you got to just show up, you got to keep on just doing it, just not quit. I feel like that's really what I got from the whole thing was just momentum drives success. Like it will get you there.
It's crazy to hear that too, because I say the word momentum so often. Like I think it's one of those things too. Like I've become a runner the past. I like to say in a funny setting, like a jogger, because like I run, but I'm a jogger. But this idea of like momentum, even in the aspect of your health, right? It's like positive or negative. If you show up every day in the gym and you feel good even on the days you don't want to, versus like you take a week off, like that momentum up or down is so significant, right? And you might feel it more when you take a week off versus if you're on for the week. It's like you're dealing with the internal battles, you don't want to go or you don't want to show up. But I just think that momentum in all aspects of life can either make or break you, and also more so it's important to recognize it, right? Like if you're not feeling good mentally and you feel off, understand like where can I go build momentum like today, right now, whether that's if I don't want to work out, don't want to walk, like how can you just like take the step forward versus just soaking in this like constant wheel of negativity. And I think in my life over the years I've tried to learn to recognize those moments quicker over time, where like even things where it's like, if you're going on your phone and you're on social for 5-10 minutes and you have an ounce of comparison in a negative way, you're like, well, okay, let me put my phone down and like how can I go build momentum in my life today and actually do something now, instead of just go down this cycle of, you know, we all deal with it in one way or another, good or bad, where I think momentum in just every aspect of life, health, business, relationships, how can you just prioritize building that? And what does that mean? It's up to everyone else to decide. But for me, it's just like putting yourself in the context of moving forward, whatever that means to you.
Solid. So I remember you did bring up books, right? Being one of the things that you kind of used just to grow. What would be out of all the books that you read, what's maybe like that one book that really stood out to you?
I mean, there's a lot, man. I think for me, one that was really good for where I was, that, you know, you have those books that you read and you can reference maybe, or one that like you just sat down and finished in 3 days. One that I actually haven't picked up in a long time, but that was very impactful early on, was a book called Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Have you read it? Mm-hmm. And I don't know.
I think I have it actually.
I haven't read it in so long, and I usually wouldn't have said that book, but I think that book, it just talked about these, like how, and I think it's prevalent nowadays in terms of how society tries to make people think a certain way. And it's just about understanding what you want and not sort of being victim to what people, or even like thinking you're a victim to what the world has to say. And I think nowadays with the abundance of misinformation and so many different people telling you different things on social media, it's so easy to play that victim card of like, oh, I did this because this person said, or oh, the government did this and I did that, versus just owning it up and not having that sort of like instant belief in everything. But that's a great book. And I think it starts off where it talks about how the book itself was sort of held from society for decades. And then Napoleon Hill's family eventually put it out there, and it's a really good book. It's like this conversation where Napoleon Hill is having sort of a conversation with the devil and it's outwitting the devil. And it talks about how this devil is like deeply ingrained in society in terms of like sort of that victimhood mentality. It's nothing about like religion by any means, but really good book.
Wow. Yeah,
dude.
nice.
So like in this whole journey, I'd assume it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows.
Definitely not.
Right. What was there like a certain struggle that you had that took you a while to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure. I mean, there's always struggles, and I think early on.
But one that like stuck with you for
Yeah.
like a couple years. I'm always curious to ask because guys like you, there's always like some sort of like interesting internal motivator.
For sure.
You know.
I mean, I think one element of not only struggle but just like internal dialogue that was especially early on, right? Like coming from a small town, I was the youngest of I have two older brothers, so youngest of three. And I think one of my internal struggles, but also like realizations, was like, why do I think I can do this, right? Like coming from a small town, both my brothers went to college, dropped out. My parents didn't finish college. And I say that with so much love and respect for who they are. But in terms of like the environment I grew up in, so much love, incredible parents, incredible brothers. But this idea of, like we talked about before the show, like going to Costa Rica, like I experienced things early on of like trips initially with my school, but then from a business perspective that like opened up my perspective on the world. And I think it's like once you let the genie out of the bottle in terms of like the perspective of the world, you start traveling, you start seeing different things, you realize how small the bubble is from where you grew up and that the world is so much bigger. Like I didn't fly on an airplane until I was 16 years old. And for me, that was so monumental in terms of like that experience to realize that there's so much more to offer. So the question of struggle, right? When you start pursuing this career, I don't want to call it a career at first, but just you're pursuing this creative route of business and entrepreneurship and starting a company and wanting to do a podcast and interview great people. I think it was like initially like that internal doubt, right? It's like, why me? Like coming from this small town with no resources, like didn't grow up in an environment that was conducive to entrepreneurship. Like, why do I think I can do this? But then battled with what I talked about earlier, like the self-confidence to think like, why can't I do this in a world where everything's interconnected and you have all the resources at your fingertips? But you hear that all the time of like, oh, you can learn anything on YouTube. And that's true. And I'm the firmest believer in that. But I think it's also one of those things where it's like, not everyone in the world can be, not everyone in the world could be a billionaire. Not everyone in the world can be the exact same in terms of success, and whether that's financial or whatever it may be. So I always battled with just like, why do I think I could do this?
Why did you want to do it?
And when I say...
And what was it anyway?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'll answer that. I mean, one hurdle, and I think this is like for even young people out there, growing up in Virginia and then wanting to move to LA or Arizona and like move across the country, that was like a massive goal for me at the time. Like moving to that Build Your Empire house in Arizona and like running the company out of there. When I was 18, right? Like both my brothers were still living at home. I didn't have any sort of guidance of like what moving out consisted of. Of course, like I didn't go to college. I didn't do that whole experience. It was like going to high school, taking 3 classes senior year, traveling a bunch, to then boom, moving across the country with some of my best friends and business partners and just going down that lane. And I think in terms of like even making that jump, there was so much doubt of like, wow, if I don't do this, am I going to have, that doesn't work out. Do I have to move back home? Like, how am I going to feel? Am I going to be a failure? Like to my family, from my brothers, to the people that I look up to. And of course it's like, at the end of the day, everyone has their own stuff going on. And I always now reflect on that. It's like no one, everyone can care about you, but no one cares. Meaning everyone is so in their own world, dealing with their own problems, that whether you succeed or fail, people are, going to support you on the wins. And if you fail, hopefully they'll say, great, like on to the next thing, right? Like you may have people that, they are like obviously like your core group of friends and people in your life that are closest to you through the hardships and the successes. But to the main question of like, what was it? I think it was just that belief to pursue business and entrepreneurship, right? Like I have never worked a corporate job. I've never been employed prior to like getting acquired and then working at the acquiring company.
That's actually hilarious.
So like for me,
sold his company
right?
and then
That's
he
kinda
worked.
sick.
I sold my company at 21 to this a company up in Toronto, ViralNation, and like that was the first time I was an employee at an organization. So for me, it like that's it, which is like betting on myself enough to provide for myself, for a future family. And I wasn't thinking about this at the time, but now that I'm engaged as of 6 weeks ago.
Congrats, by the way. Dude.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's like, thank you so much. I think that's what it is. It's like pursuing a life on your own terms, business, entrepreneurship, and betting on yourself, like putting all your chips in. And when I say in, it's like on yourself. And I think in a world and nowadays where entrepreneurship is so prevalent in society, you see everyone starting side hustles. You see all on TikTok ways to make money online. It's it's embedded in society of like you can do things. And I think Gary Vee he's been such an incredible spokesperson on this since the earliest days of his book Crush It. It's like how to turn your passions into something that you can live on. And I think nowadays to actually make that jump, especially if you're young and you're kind of looking at all the options you have in life to play it safe, to go do something that's more risky, like actually making that jump and pursuing it wholeheartedly. Like I never even had a plan B. And I think that's also a massive indicator of like the journey thus far, which is just going all in. And I think that concept of all in, people can think about it however they want, but it's either you are all in or you might have this sliver of doubt that you also believe, which is okay. But for me, like ever since I was 16, 17 years old, I was embracing the path of the unknown, which I think is a powerful thing.
Just burn the boats.
Yeah, I love
Exactly.
The idea of burning the boats, right?
Very, yes.
Couple things I wanted to say, man. First things first, obviously, congrats on your engagement.
Thank you.
Second of all, congrats on your 1-year anniversary of selling Mediakits.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? September, right?
Last September, that's right.
That's tight, man.
Hey, hold up, sorry, I won't catch up. Anyone here hot as hell?
A little toasty.
Okay.
This guy.
This guy was well, it's because of the audio or something? Is it going to be that bad? Okay, well, I'm sweating, so.
Are you?
Yeah, this thing is going on.
Little sweat over here.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
All right, cool.
Really?
So a couple things I wanted to mention. You spoke about the idea that, you kind of like getting out of the small town of yours and how it really like shifted your perspective on how big the world is. That is something that I slowly recognized. It's funny enough, living in California where it's like, there's so much openness to it and like, there's so many things to discover, so many places to go to, like it's endless here, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that I always appreciated about going out was this idea that once you go out and you see how big the world is, whether you travel locally or you go out and about in the world, one thing that it helps you recognize is when you get back home and you're no longer, or when you come back to those four corners that you're entrapped in all day, after having experienced how big the world is, you recognize how small those four walls are and how everything within them becomes a little bit more insignificant.
Yeah.
And so it really helps you kind of like just open your perspective to where it takes a little bit of stress off of your back for what's currently in your life, because you recognize that there's so much more to life.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I wanted to mention that you said was the idea that nobody cares, and the individuality of human beings.
Yeah. Can you tell me your line?
My line?
Yeah.
What's the line?
What's the line?
BB always says, and I guess I'll say the line for him. At the end, like
it's your line.
BB,
it's your line.
His name is BB, but but like his line that apparently he's acting shy about is no.
I mean, I'll remember when you say it, of course.
At the end of the day, he's like, whatever happens, no one else is gonna pay my bills.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
So that's
no one's gonna pay your bills at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it's funny too because it's we've talked about this so many times before where it's like the idea of like, you want to do something, risky. You want to go talk to this person because you think it's a great person to network with, and you're like shy, you're scared, fear of rejection, all this and all that.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, dude, you got to realize nobody's paying attention, dude. Nobody gives a crap. There's always going to be people out there who are like, haters basically. They want to talk smack about you. They want to put you down. And it's funny because it's like, once you recognize that people only talk that way because it comes from a place of unsolved insecurities.
Oh yeah.
Unrecognized insecurities, you slowly recognize, like, dude, you know what? It's so much easier to shut off that noise because it's almost like you feel bad for them. You almost like feel the pity. And so yeah, I think those were definitely some great points. Great points that you mentioned. I wanted to ask about the because you said you were a sports guy growing up.
Yeah, for sure.
So your intraspinous injury that you got.
Interspinous, you got it.
Yeah. I did my research. Man.
Yeah. I love it.
Ligament damage. So you said that happened because like during football?
Yeah, it was the first hitting practice sophomore year.
This was in practice?
Yeah, it was first day of first day. It's hilarious, right? It's sophomore year.
After all that hockey,
lacrosse, but this was like, coming into freshman year of high school, and so freshman and sophomore year was so different for me, where it's like freshman year, I was just, playing football, the whole nines. After freshman year, going into that summer, you're training all summer for football. First day of hitting practice where you're putting on your pads, throwing the helmets on, you're going on the field to practice with the team. That's when it happens, literally day one. And for me, it was one of those moments where you're at practice, my helmet ended up being sort of too loose, where it was like this one-on-one drill, my helmet sort of popped off my head a little bit and I landed on it when I hit the ground.
Oh my God.
And it wasn't one of those injuries where I was rushed to the hospital in that day, like that moment, but I woke up the next day where I could barely move my head like 1 centimeter in either direction without excruciating pain. Ooh. Go to the doctor and do the x-rays. And I think this is just, I tell this story from my personal perspective, but I think all of us can relate to it, where you have this massive identity change and you might not recognize it in that moment or not, but I was 15 sitting in this room being naive about injuries of like, oh, like I'll be good in a couple weeks. My neck hurts very bad and I can't move, but I'll be good. Like, it's the name of the game, injuries. Doctor comes in, he says, I have good news and I have bad news for you. The good news is you're not paralyzed, clearly. And I'm like, well, that's weird good news, but okay. Bad news is you can no longer play football due to the instability of your spine, and you have to be in a neck brace for up to 6 months, depending on how you recover. And then he's like taking out the neck brace out of the bag, and I'm like in disbelief, right? And like it was like a snap, and looking back, it was that moment that changed everything. But in that moment, it was the worst moment in my life, right? Where I'm depressed, I'm angry at the world, I'm angry at my parents, I'm just in this neck brace literally 18 hours a day, or no, 23 hours a day, versus only when I'm showering or if I need to like let my neck breathe for a bit. And that was when my identity just sort of got ripped out of me in terms of like, I identify as this athlete who's going to practice after school. That's where I spend my time. That's who I spend my time with. And then once you remove that, right, I'm no longer playing football. I'm no longer with this in this team environment. Who am I? And I think whether that's you're selling your company or you're like leaving a new job or you're going to a new job or you're starting a new project, I've always been a firm believer in, I kind of describe it as like identity shifting, where it's like anything that you truthfully, wholeheartedly commit to, like you have to have so much self-belief and conviction in terms of, I am that person in conversation. I am that person, like, right? I'm someone that, I do my ice baths. I like running. I'm building a new software company in the podcasting space. I've had a podcast for 6 years. Like, these are things that when I talk about, I commit to wholeheartedly. And I think that happens in every aspect of my life. And it kind of goes back to that moment of realizing, like when you quote unquote have nothing, or you have that something ripped away from you, you quickly have to scatter to like fill your bucket of identity of like, who am I? Like, what am I talking about? What do I stand by? And I think that, again, looking back, is when I learned that lesson in terms of how I apply it to my life today.
You read the book Atomic Habits?
I have, yeah.
Because you're basically explaining that.
I have, for sure.
That's great.
So, I mean, obviously it's kind of like, in an almost ironic way to say, it's like that injury was the best thing that happened to you probably.
For sure.
So...
and it's funny because someone asked me, like, what do you actually think you'd be doing if it wasn't for that? And I genuinely
The NFL, baby.
Yeah, I mean NFL or podcast, either or.
Either that, or he would have still in Virginia, probably doing some regular Joe Schmo stuff, probably.
Yeah, it's interesting. It really
I don't
is.
even know what people do in Virginia.
I'm a firm believer in like
They drink.
Everything. They drink. Oh god.
Hey, Virginia's kind of cool, actually.
Virginia's
I've been to
incredible.
Virginia. He's been to Virginia.
I've never been.
Yeah, you're a loser. Nobody's talking to you. Anyways,
Was, man.
Don't talk to my couch like this.
Damn.
no, but I think it's really dope how you really did have like a positive reaction to the whole thing. I mean, probably not initially, right? You're talking about like
not at all.
the depressive phases you went through and whatnot. Now, just in general, would you say because of your upbringing, you were able to kind of like reflect on the whole thing that happened to you and then turn it into a positive thing? Or was that something that you had to learn the hard way?
It was definitely learning it the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I shouldn't even say I think. Like when I was in that moment, and I think it goes to other areas in my life where I don't think just you need to live in this positive state, right? Like if you were to talk to my friends and say, oh, like, is Casey a positive person? They would all say yes, sometimes overly positive and optimistic. But over the years, I've thought about that, and I think it's so important to embrace whatever it is you are feeling. If you're in pain physically or emotionally, if you're going through hardships, or if you have the successes, if you can embrace that and know that this moment is not going to last, let me truly feel this way, and then know that it will pass and it's okay. I think for me it was not having the foresight then, but feeling exactly how I needed to feel: depressed, pissed off, and really anticipating change. Yeah, like I wanted change. Did not want to feel like that, and therefore my actions just spoke. It started writing my script for me of like, how can I channel that into something more positive and productive? And I see these books right here, but it's like diving into this world of the unknown about business and entrepreneurship and building a brand and just what that entails. I just became obsessed with how can I, become better and learn new things. And I think that curious mentality is like what Larry King talked about in the interview that I did with him. He says you never learn anything while you're talking, and just embrace this idea of being a listener. And for me, that's been such a foundational element of my entire career, from the little micro moments of like you're in an Uber and you're listening to the driver take a quick phone call. It's like I'm always listening, and I think that goes back to like the first question about like how have I gone about my career. It's like it's one thing that yes, we're all listeners and we pay attention, but from networking events and podcasts like this, like genuinely embracing this idea of listening, and not just listening to get information, but to understand how other people show up in their life and how other people react to things and how other people communicate, to then take that and actually learn something from everything that's happening around you versus just showing up in the world and just portraying your own thoughts, I think is something that Larry King talked about, and it's such a
having the
passionate
student
way.
mentality.
Yeah, like that lifelong, and I think that's when I was younger in terms of like my upbringing. I wasn't even aware that I was doing that, but then after diving into personal development, I recognized things about myself that have then played such a instrumental role, and I think led into even podcasting, like wanting to find a channel to do that in a more professional setting.
That's very cool. I like that. I like that connection there. Would you say you're a very observant person? Like you're almost hyper observant?
I would think so. Sometimes my fiance proves that I'm not, though.
I feel like every man goes through that.
Every man
goes through that, man.
That's funny.
For sure.
Actually, it's funny.
That's what popped up in my brain.
This is totally off topic, but I was watching this TikTok about if men had a IT help desk. Or like a help desk, basically. And so the guy calls and he goes, "Man, I've been trying to find the ketchup bottle for ages. I'm in the pantry. Do you mind helping me out? My wife is yelling at me in the background." And so you hear his wife literally just go, "Hey, Steve, whatever his name is, it's right there. How do you not see it?" And he goes, I can't see it. And so he's like, "All right, sounds good. Let me get my guys on this." So there's like literally 6 guys just ronded on the computer looking at the video feed. And they're like, "Oh, we can't find anything." He goes, and then the help desk guy goes, "Okay, we got to get creative. What should we do? He's like, "Oh, yo, one of our coworkers, talk to his wife. Ask him if she can come." So like they call one of the coworkers' wives. He's like, "Hey, babe, do you see the ketchup in this video?" And she goes, "Yeah, it's right there. It's behind the thing." And he goes, And like she explained exactly where it was, and everyone was like, "Oh, what the hell? I didn't see that." Dude, I feel like every man experiences that stuff.
That's funny. Well, besides that element, would you say in general you're a hyper observant individual? Because I mean, you're just talking about the details, like how the Uber answers the phone. I'm like, yo, this guy.
For sure, to the point where. Like when I'm driving, let's say I take a phone call. When I was even driving here, I called Jacqueline, my fiance, and she knows this about me. Where like, I've never been in a car accident. Actually, one of my biggest fears is like being in a bad car accident. Because of my neck, but I just dislike this idea.
Don't do it, dude. It sucks.
Getting in a car accident.
It's not fun.
Yeah.
But that being said, I'm so hyper observant in terms of driving, and I own this. Where it's like, if I'm talking on the phone, if I'm switching lanes, like. I'm going to hang up and call you back. Like little things that are just like, I place so much emphasis on not even driving responsibly, but just observing the road and observing the things around you. Because it's like a fearful thing of mine.
Mm-hmm. Dude, we should take him to Lebanon.
Yeah, don't go to anywhere in the Middle East. Don't go anywhere in the Middle East.
Egypt, Lebanon, bro. You'd love it there,
anywhere
bro.
in the Middle East, you take buses from one spot to the other. There's don't get in a small car.
No,
dude.
just take a blindfold.
I've been
Just block back yourself.
Casey, this is the experience.
Wake up.
I go to Lebanon like last year. I go to Lebanon last year, and like I get into my cousin's car, and I start putting the seatbelt on. First thing he says, he's like, "Hey man, real men here don't put seatbelts on." And I'm just like,
I hate this already.
Take off the seatbelt. Use a cigarette.
yeah. Wait, did I tell you the story?
No.
That was literally what happened.
Really?
I swear to God.
Is that a stereotype?
No.
Yeah. Apparently.
I swear to God. He goes, yo, take your seatbelt off. You're taking a cigarette. Be a real man.
No.
Yeah, I swear to God.
Come on.
He was there. I was there.
That was my uncle.
No, bro. Listen.
Yo, you were in the back seat, right?
In the Middle East, there's like a set of it. There's like a bro code. There's like a bro code. If you ever get into like a car, a taxi or whatever, the first thing you do, right? If you're gonna light up your own cigarette, the first thing you do is you offer to the driver, then the passenger, then the homies in the back. Like it's literally standard. It's code.
Wow.
But anyways, that was
That's
a fun,
hilarious.
That was a fun tangent.
I thought I told you. I was like,
That's great.
how'd you know?
No, he just knows. He just knows.
Yeah, and bro, there's no law. Like you just drive.
Yeah.
I actually like driving. I feel like it's more efficient.
I was in China. I've been in China twice. Crazy over there too, and in some areas for sure. But
China's not too bad.
It's a fun tangent.
It's the drivers are like
for sure. In Mexico, like Tulum.
Hilarious. But anyways, no, the reason why I thought about that, I was wondering if you're like hyper observant, is because I'm also a baby brother. I'm the youngest of 4, 2 boys, 1 girl.
Got it.
That are above me. And I feel like there is this natural quality of like the youngest sibling where they really are just hyper observant, and what I think is really, really cool, and I feel like has been a huge effect in my life. And it kind of like, in a sense, is, kind of like put me far ahead mentally, is just the idea that growing up, I was able to observe other people live. And similar to like, having mentors in life who just share their experiences that fast track the learning process of certain things. I feel like me having older siblings and just observing them in my life has allowed me to mentally fast track to a more mature level.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I completely agree.
So
especially from this sibling dynamic, like seeing what the things they deal with going into high school or middle school, or like the sports teams that are with the older kids, like experiencing what they get to experience, but not having to go through it.
Yep.
You learn from that.
Yeah.
I completely agree.
That's super awesome. So I was wondering, man, you were 15, 16, you said, when this happened, the injury?
Yeah, 15.
So I know people always ask you, like, what if it didn't happen to you, right? But here's a more interesting question. What if it happened later in life?
It's actually, I think this is a good example. So the last couple of years, I've always taken my health seriously, but especially from dating and now being engaged to Jacqueline, my fiance. She's an integrative nutritional health coach, is like the healthiest person I know, and she's instilled these values in me, whether that's from what you're eating and nutrition or from even working out. But if that happened later in life, and something that did happen recently that wasn't as significant was I was doing this program, 75 Hard. Are you guys familiar? 75
Heard of
Hard.
it, yeah.
So I was doing it. I started it in February, ended it in May.
You were doing it.
Yeah, I have that right there, dude.
Oh yeah.
Oh, are you still doing it, or are you done with it?
I have like probably I didn't finish. I was like freaking like 40.
That's good. You gotta own it. You gotta own that.
Yeah, no,
I know it was. I know it was
I was
a
like
complete
43 days in, and then I'll be honest, I got married. So it's really hard to consider. Like,
congrats, by the way.
Thank you, bro. Yeah. Not an excuse in any way, but it was definitely like very challenging.
Wait, when did you get married?
It was literally like a month ago.
Oh, dude, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Congrats.
thank you, bro.
Wow, so
I know it was like it was like a very rude interruption to what you were saying, but when this guy was explaining it to us, he gave the most brief, out of pocket description of what that
75
was.
hard.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I was like, what did I tell you? I don't remember. I was like, hey,
you were like, you have to wake up 75 days with a boner.
That's what people think. That's what people think when they see it.
I'll never forget because Nicolette was like, "Yo, Adam, chill."
Dude, it genuinely though, like the program is game changing.
So continue on. You started that program.
You did it more than once.
Yeah, I've done it multiple times now. I failed it twice too, but I've done it 4 times total. Completed it this year, but this year was the most impactful for me. I started in February. It's 75 days, and overall, for people that may not know, you have to do 2 workouts a day, both for 45 minutes. One of them has to be outside. One of them could be a walk, whatever it may be. Drink a gallon of water a day. You have to read 10 pages in a nonfiction book. You have to take a progress picture in the mirror, and then you have to stick to a diet. And that you can kind of define that however you want. Truthfully, it's not a fitness program by any means. It was created by this guy, Andy Frisella, and who's an incredible entrepreneur. And it's simply a mental toughness challenge. And I've done it before, but this year I did it for 75 days. And sort of the question that I asked myself on day 75, I was actually back home in Virginia in May for my mom's birthday, and finished day 75 and wake up the next day, like you're done. You can either start phase 1, then there's like 3 different phases in the program. I didn't plan to start phase 1, and I didn't start the official phase 1 right after, but I woke up on day 76, and I think we should all ask ourselves sort of questions like this. And it was, is it easy to drink a gallon of water a day? Yes, it is. Like if you're tracking it and you're actually, drinking the water, yes. But is it easy not to drink a gallon of water a day? Absolutely. Like a gallon of water is not something you just pick up at 3 o'clock and down by 8 o'clock at night. Same thing. It's like, is it easy to work out today? Yes. You got to put in the effort to go to the gym or do something active outside. Great. Is it easy not to work out today? Absolutely. It's 75 days. I've been so disciplined and consistent. Let me take a day off. You go through all of these motions I went through all these motions of questions, and then simply just committed to that day to do 1 extra day. And then that commitment ended up being an additional 25 days where I was like, all right, I'm going to do day 100. And to the question, and this is why I brought this up, is it's ironic because on day 100, or after day 75, I'll say this, I posted on my Instagram story. Andy actually saw it. We've been buddies for a while, and he invited me on his podcast, which is like a very big podcast. And long story short, went out to St. Louis. But between the period of finishing 75 hard and doing his podcast, get to day 100, and I'm squatting in the gym, day 100, finishing strong, first workout of the day, end up completely just tweaking my back in the gym to the point where I'm in the midst of doing a squat, feel it, can't even stand up. I'm on the ground. I'm like, Jacqueline, you got to come pick me up. And I cannot walk back home. Like, this is bad. Granted, it wasn't interspinous ligament damage, but ended up going to the UCLA, get a x-ray, and I sprained my back. And, again, like we all deal with injuries, but for me, that was sort of like a reminder, because I haven't had any type of like serious injury like that since being in the neck brace, where I went from just being the peak disciplined, active person in terms of on this program to then tweak my back, can't run or work out for literally like 3 weeks. I took it easy. It was like 3 days I could barely get out of bed. And to the question of like, if this happened later in life, my answer is I know it's going to happen later in life, whether that's neck brace injury or some type of unpredictable event, like that will happen in life. And I believe it's through being ready for that, in terms of like, you don't know what it's going to be or how it's going to happen, but knowing that significant events in your life will happen, whether that's death in the family or a personal injury or something there's a significant in business, something happens that is just terrible. You learn, especially from doing interviews with successful entrepreneurs on my podcast, you always got to expect the unexpected. And if you just live a life of embracing the unknown, I think once the unknown things do happen in life, you are much more emotionally prepared to go through it. I think this idea of being at center. There's a mentor of mine who I interviewed. His name is Trevor Moawad. He actually passed away 2 years ago, and he was the brain trainer for Russell Wilson in the NFL. And he talked about this idea of I don't want to misrepresent his book. Let me Trevor Moawad. Okay, so it's a book called Getting to Neutral, and he talks about this mindset of neutrality, where when things are great, be neutral, because then you're more, at center. If you win the Super Bowl, like, be neutral, because when you're losing the game and you're down by 4, you got to be neutral. You can't let the downside affect how you think. And I think that mindset of what he talks about, of like, hey, again, this is like a long-winded answer to the question of like, if this happened later in life, I think it's just one of the superpowers that I've tried to embrace over the years, is this idea of a neutral mentality. When things are great, be neutral. When things are terrible, be neutral, and don't let that emotional baggage tear you down to be indecisive about the situation. So I think it's just like leaning into that and trying to stick to that in the good and the bad and the injuries and the successes. So yeah.
So what was the book called again?
Getting to Neutral, and then his new book called It Takes What It Takes.
It Takes What It Takes. That's cool.
But he was incredible. And
so Get into Neutral is basically just like really just teaching stoicism.
In a sense, yes.
Nice.
Emotional intelligence at the highest level of just like remaining, in that neutral mentality, not good, not bad, just it is what it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love how you answered that, because you're saying that like it's gonna happen.
For sure.
It's gonna happen. And it's funny, man, because like, within like the past year, there's been some crazy stuff that has happened, just like from business sides of things,
Yep.
And I'm still waiting till the day where like we just like share a bunch of stories about it. But him and we experienced something very, very similar, because we were in the same industry, pretty much working together in the same company. And it was related to cars. Right. And so we were in the car rental business. Okay. So you can imagine how that can go south really fast.
I've heard horror
literally
stories.
South.
Yeah.
Like sold to the cartel south. You know what I mean?
Oh my God.
But it was really, it was, yeah.
His car.
Imagine, bro.
One of his cars.
Imagine a brand new Corvette gets sold to the cartel, and then you have to figure out how to recover it.
Did you recover it?
I did, yeah.
Oh my God.
Only for it to get totaled a couple months later. But whatever, the point is.
Gosh, that's brutal.
But the point I wanted to bring up was just it, like the idea that it will happen. Because within that whole experience, when the whole, sold to the cartel situation happened, that was, I experienced something emotionally that I think was brand new to me. It was brand new to me.
Yeah.
As much as I'd like to think, I'm a very, very, strong-minded, like, like it's hard to kind of like tear me down mentally type of guy. When that situation happened, it was something that, like I said, I've experienced never before. It was really, really interesting. Yeah. It was pretty dark, right? Very self-destructive almost. And then we, by the grace of God, we were able to overcome that situation. And then just a couple months later, from a money standpoint, a worse situation happened to me. But the way I approached the situation the second time was completely void of emotion. Because of that initial experience. Yeah. Because of the initial experience, the second time going into a harsh situation like that, I was like, okay, cool. There was a problem. We were able to solve it before, right? What do we need to do this time to make sure we get to the end of this road? Yep. And I think that's really, really beautiful how you mentioned that, like, it will happen, and because of your initial experience, every time it might happen again, and God forbid it ever does again, but when it happened, the second time, even though it wasn't as bad, still the way you were able to approach it, the way you were able to approach it was just a healthier manner. Yeah. It didn't necessarily send you down the spiral of like self-destruction.
Absolutely.
So I'm a bit curious, man. Do you think you took like more of like a chill perspective to life when growing? Or were you very
growing up, or
no, like into like entrepreneurship and business? Like, did you take more of like a like I'll give you an example. Shout out to my boy Omar. Like, you're about to see him.
Yeah.
But he's a master of that. Like he'll work his ass off. He's a very hard worker, but he won't do it at the cost of his like sanity. And I've always respected him for it, because like he takes a very like, I don't know, like he's always down on a Saturday afternoon to hang out with the boys if he wants to. Like he takes a chill way of life because he understands there's like years to come for it, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's kind of how you did it? Because of those injuries, like you kind of were like, you know what, like I'm just gonna try things and not be so hard on myself about it and just flow through it? Or were you really like intense about like hitting KPIs and hitting like goals and doing what you got to do?
There's a quote, and I'll define it, which I love and it's always stuck with me, and it's, I'm always in a rush but never in a hurry. And my definition of that, and everyone can kind of take it as their own, is you always need to be pressing, at least how I view it. Like, I'm always pressing forward with intensity, and I think that word's important. But I'm also of the known fact that I'm super early in my career. I need to go through the process of learning things in a sequential order, and you can't be doing, when you look at other people's lives, Gary or whoever it may be that's even someone like Elon, they had to go through their process to be the man or woman they are today, and I respect that process. So it's like I'm not in a hurry to get there, but I'm in a rush in terms of being the best version of myself today, right? And I think just since I was 16, 17, and it's changed over the years for sure, of like I used to think about things as like do or die, meaning like if I don't go to that event, I'm going to miss out on the biggest thing of my life and I'm going to have the biggest regret, right? And then as time goes on, I'm more nowadays of like very meticulous about like what events I go to or things that I spend my time on. And it used to be, in my eyes, when I was 16, 17, living at home, it's like if I don't do this X, then this imaginary negative outcome or missed opportunity will happen. And I think at times it's great to have that intensity, in terms of like that intense mindset of how you view the world. But I would say I have been very of the opinion of like falling in love with the journey, right? Like we all have these outcomes of whether that's selling a company or starting a show and getting to episode 100, and you can't obsess about episode 100 without doing episode 1 and having that same type of intensity on episode 1. And I think that's how I was always approached it. Of, like even when I started my podcast, one of the earliest sort of like KPIs was how can I do 60 interviews in 90 days? That was my sort of like my podcast sprint that I wanted to do, because I had this meeting with Gary Vee in New York, like 5-10 minute meeting that I scheduled. And I ended up I did that, and I was so intense about it. And I think that also catapulted me in my thinking of how I approach podcasting and why I fell in love with the medium. But I wasn't obsessed with episode 60. I was obsessed with sending messages and getting responses and getting dates on the calendars, and like that's what I was obsessed about. The actual doing versus, like any type of end result. And I think it wasn't that I was just in that mindset from the beginning, but I think when I reflect on like the personal development I've had over the years from books, from mentors, some of the most, and I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts on this, some of the most influential parts of my life came from when I was like 16, 17. I just felt like the information then was so fresh and so new. And I was in this more like young, naive state where I put so much trust into information that I learned from what I thought and think is valuable people. So the simple quote, like embracing the journey and like fell in love with the process, these cliche things that you hear, I think it's one thing to hear them, but I felt that I really tried to zone in on them early on, where like, yes, you can obsess about an outcome for the sake of it, but a lot of people attach their identity to an outcome or their identity to a company or their identity to a show, when I know that I'm in love with the process now. I have these audacious goals and places I want to be, but that's not going to change who I am. More so, even in a more contextual way too. For example, right? I just got engaged. Fiance and I were talking about the wedding, and I always tell her this, and I think it's so important, where I'm like, the man I am today versus the man I will be when I'm standing at the wedding getting married. Like, I can't wait to meet that man, because I know I am so obsessed with the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, like, growth of who I am. Like, first, like when we saw each other 3 years ago, right? Like, from the growth of my hair to the growth of my like individuality and like what I want to do, right? I think it's just number one, I love the question about that, and I think there's always been a constant fluctuation of like moments there you need to be more intense, especially when you're building a company and you have investors and you're trying to get to a certain place in the business setting. But from a personal setting,
do you work long hours?
I do, yeah. I think it's
like, do you believe in that, or like not really?
For sure. I mean, absolutely. I think in a world where I work from home, right? When we were building Mediakits, it was all remote. And it's actually an interesting perspective that I'm excited to mature into over the years. Where when I see someone like Andy Frisella, right, who I walked into First Form and walked out, I felt like a completely different person. Like, to see the culture that he's built inside of his organization, and I've been to a lot of incredible HQs over the years, from tech companies to early stage startups. Something about First Form, which is Andy Frisella's supplement company, is just so special to experience. Like, the people that you meet, the level of integrity that they have, how they carry themselves, how they treat you, speaks volumes to the man that Andy is and the culture that he's built. But when it comes to like working the long hours, I am obsessed with building a culture even remotely close to what he's experienced in my own way throughout my career, because there's something about obviously the in-person dynamic that I know I've been lacking in my life in terms of like a proper work setting of like consistent team building versus online and remote and all this stuff.
Like having a company with employees.
Yeah, like at Mediakits. Yeah, at Mediakits we had 12 employees and it was all remote. And like my fiance was their COO, Kieran was co-founder. We lived in a different state. We had some engineers all in the U.S., Kentucky, Louisiana, L.A., but it was all remote. And growing up in the early stages of my career when things like COVID are happening and remote working and Zoom, it's an interesting time frame where I think I am excited to, when I think about long hours and like this idea of like hard work, it's just understanding like where can I be the most impactful based on what my goals are. But I'm definitely excited long term in terms of how I define that, like having an incredible ecosystem and environment that is conducive and creates experiences where someone in 5 years, 10 years will be on a podcast saying, wow, when I went to X company that Casey was a part of, like I felt this way after leaving, the same way that I can speak about First Form. I think just this idea of culture is the true epitome of what it means to be an entrepreneur in terms of how you make people feel from what it is that you're building.
Huh. That's a very cool perspective shift. Even for me, I just had like an interesting shift on what you just said there. You know, one thing I love about podcasts.
This guy's a bully, dude. This guy's a bully in his company, bro.
Me?
All of his employees hate him, dude.
Damn, yeah, they all file lawsuits against him on a weekly basis.
Did you ever go to court?
No, I was in Japan.
Is that a real story?
I'm so glad you caught that, dude.
Yo, do you know Jan Stavisky, King Credit?
Oh, yeah.
You do? Yeah, you met with who, man? Yeah. So we had him on the podcast. So he goes, yeah, guys, I was like, I was traveling the world and I was getting sued left and right by creditors. And I think one of these guys.
No, you asked. You were like, have you ever been?
Yeah. I was like, you ever been to court? And he goes, no, I was in Japan.
Oh my God.
It was too funny, bro. But podcasts are cool because it allows you to meet people like Andy and feel like how it feels to have your dream become a reality. And I think like, at least for me, the podcast has done that for me, where I'm not going to lie. Like when I first started my career, it was like, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do. I had no clue. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to go build a network of people. So I'm like, I'll figure it out from there. And being able to sit down with people and actually physically like go to HQ or like see somebody who's running a company with 500 employees and he started from scratch and he shows you pictures of him in this garage or like certain things. You're like, holy smokes, this is real. Like you did this. Like this is cool.
Yeah.
But I never saw it that way. Like, cause I'm kind of going through a weird phase right now in my life in terms of my career where like initially I started because I had like this chip on my shoulder to prove a point to myself because of my insecurities. But now I've like overcome those, and now I'm kind of like, okay, now what? Like, why am I doing this? But I think you just gave me my answer. That's freaking dope.
I think
I think that's really interesting because you always mention how your passion is in the idea of building teams and building systems.
Big time. Like,
And
like I struggle heavy with like. The reason why I'm asking you these questions because like personal experiences, right? Like I struggle heavy with like I look at people who are like, yeah, it was my passion to do podcasts, my passion to do this, passion. In my head, I'm like, I'm not passionate about any of that.
Straight up.
Like I don't, I can care less, you know.
I am.
And it's weird because like it's to a point where like I genuinely like have zero care for it, and so I struggled a lot trying to figure out what the hell my passion was until I realized like, wait. Building systems, building teams, etc., putting all this together, figuring out. It's like a big puzzle piece for me. Like that by itself is the passion itself. But that was cool. Thank you for that.
Dude,
so
that's dope.
to connect that whole thing you mentioned, the last thing you said to another book. I'm assuming you've read How to Win Friends and Influence Others.
That's actually one of
Carnegie,
the
baby.
Yeah, that's his favorite
staple.
book. It's an absolute staple, dude. Absolute staple, and it's case in point. You know what I mean? It's literally just like. The stuff you learn from that book is pretty much exactly what you just said, and it seems like exactly how the guy from First Forum kind of just structured his company.
I was gonna say, so Andy has this room, like the library in the First Forum headquarters, where he has specific books. I don't want to misrepresent, but let's call it 10 books in that room. Every employee has to read all of them, and one of them is How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I think even to what I said before of like the information that I was learning early on has stuck with me the most sometimes. That was a book, one of the first books I picked up where when it comes to my sort of curiosity on people in that book, it talks about, you know, making eye contact, knowing people's names, like being more interested than interesting. And that fundamental belief, I think, has led into why I, not only am I passionate about podcasting, like the medium is whatever, but just like the human connection and this being a medium to have that in a more natural setting than just these not being here and me just coming over and us talking for 2 hours, right? Like it's a different medium and it adds that context, which is so important. I think that's where I try to like zone in is like there's context to everything in terms of people's actions or why they start companies or how they solve problems. I think podcasting just creates such a unique context of conversation, and that book was sort of the amplifier of why I fell in love with the medium in terms of the human element of it. So yeah, no, it's spot on.
One thing I just thought about is I enjoy when people come up to me at times and they'll be like, I just realized that I've been talking about myself this whole time and I don't know anything about you. Like almost to that point where like, I did such a good job of being interested in the other person, of asking them questions that they just kept on going, and I had no problem with it. To the point where they actually realized, like, wow, I can't believe, like, you just took me through this whole journey.
That's even the chills, man.
Wow,
I
look,
think
it's Malik.
that is such a powerful thing to be able to do.
Yeah.
And even to where sometimes and you made me think about this, but you do that in a conversation and the person might not even recognize that, and then you leave and you're like, I hope they realize, but maybe they don't, that I was being such an intentional listener. And some people don't have the realization, and it's okay, and maybe they're listening to this and they say, oh wow, maybe that was me. And maybe we've all done that in certain areas of life when we're excited to talk about ourselves, something good is happening, that's okay. But to challenge yourself to be in a conversation, and it's the best when you meet someone that's in that same element as well, where you're like both trying to be such an intentional listener that it just pulls out, you know, both of you to realize like, okay, we're both putting in an emphasis to understand one another. It's really cool and unique.
I take that as a W, by the way.
Dude.
Like whenever like I leave an interaction and then like I sit there and have a moment, I was just like, I managed to make that all about them and like nothing about me. I take that as a dub.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just like it.
No, because like we always want to talk about ourselves.
Yeah.
We always, how's your day? Oh my, thank God you asked.
Yeah.
Like
I never had that reaction,
Yeah.
bro. I'm like, good.
yeah, because your day sucked, dude.
Yeah. No, it's also equally as powerful though, right? Like
Wow.
sometimes But the thing is too, and I recognize this a lot. I've had moments where I'm like, oh, I should have brought this up, or oh, I should have maybe mentioned this story, but oh, like, why would I need to say that? But sometimes on the flip side, right? If you're talking to someone, they're sharing about who they are. If they say something that lights something in you, to say, oh, there's like, again, context to sort of have a connection there. For example, like one of my key networking hacks or tips is like, if say I'm out at lunch and I'm somewhere and I see someone that I don't know, like maybe there's someone that's famous or not, but just someone that I don't know, but I know who they are. The first thing I always do is go on Instagram and see, is there one mutual connection that we have? Like, do they follow someone that either I've had on my podcast or that I know personally? If so, great. That is the context that if only they hear that single name or person, the conversation flips in terms of like, oh my God, you know X person. Oh my God, we went to Hawaii together. Oh, he was in my wedding or whatever. You don't know what that conversation will bring. So I think one of the things in terms of like being an intentional listener is just finding and listening for the context that you can bring to make the conversation more interconnected versus just a game of ping pong of getting to know one another, right? Like if you can bond on a similar element of a human or an experience or where you grew up or where you went to college, if you can expedite that process in a networking environment, I think you're doing you and the guest or other individuals such a service to have context to connection.
That's super cool because we were just talking about it yesterday on the phone. About like the whole idea of, like let's say that we want to get a guest on our show. What we would do is we would take a clip from.
Oh yeah.
Like let's say for example, the person we're interested in interviewing next, they did another person's show, and then we have that person on our show. We send the clip of our show with that person, send it to the person we're interested in, and just be like, yo, blah, 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 I heard you know this guy, yada, yada. And then from there, start the conversation. Because even though they're not going to be in that video, they're going to be like, oh, I know that person. And now it's like,
you gotta be
hashtag relatable.
Yeah.
And then
like one thing I did actually, like, I think the strategy that he was saying was like, you know, let's say like, you know, for example, you interviewed Rick Ross, right?
Yep.
Super cool interview, by the way. That was super dope.
You interviewed Rick Ross?
Yeah, he did.
What?
He interviewed
The boss.
the boss. Yeah. Anyway, so like, say like we're talking about Rick Ross right now, right? So let's say I take this, editors clip it.
Yep.
I DM Rick Ross, and I'm like, yo, Casey says what's up.
Yeah.
And I just keep it open ended like that.
Rose.
I don't
for
ask
sure.
for anything. I just go, hey, Casey says what's
Absolutely.
up, and they respond back and they go like, oh, that's dope, man.
Dude,
No,
that's exactly how I actually got Rick Ross on my show.
Oh,
No way.
No,
It's crazy.
No, for example.
Wait, hey, can we clip this, guys?
No, for example, because of this simple thing, his favorite author was Robert Greene, who he's publicly talked about in
Okay,
so many.
pause. You've interviewed Robert Greene?
Yeah.
is.
He said that.
Where were you, bro? Were you in the pantry? Like,
Yeah, no, he said that.
When?
he said he's
Well, no,
interviewed him
at the
multiple
time,
times.
though,
That was today?
No,
I'm just kidding. Yeah, go ahead.
at the time, I didn't interview Robert yet, but I was always interested to, and it kind of goes back to what you said, where I saw Rick Ross loved Robert Greene. I was working on an interview with Robert Greene. I ended up doing the interview with Robert Greene, and then after I interviewed Robert Greene, reached out to Rick Ross on Instagram DMs. I was like, this is what I said. This is what got the interview. I was like, hey, Rick Ross, would love to have my podcast for 20 minutes. I just sat down with your good friend, Robert Greene. Would love to use this as an opportunity to promote your new book. And it was sort of like a value stack
Such a smart
thing.
Yeah.
And I asked him, and I'll show you the clip after this, or maybe you can clip it on here. I asked him during the interview, and I never asked this because it's like, why? But for Rick Ross, I was curious. I was like, so why did you say yes to being on this show? Especially if it's like a Hail Mary DM, someone like Rick Ross, 20 million followers, famous musician, like curious to know why he did it. I didn't have an agent. No one pinged him. He just saw Robert Greene. But he's like, man, you presented yourself like a boss. You came to me. He's like, this is what he said. He's like,
I think I've seen that
He
clip.
said, he's like, man, you came to me. You didn't have your hands out. You came with value. Gave me the time. You told me the person I love, Robert Greene, and it's an opportunity to promote my book. How can I say no to that? And like the way he broke it down though is like, he's like, yeah, you presented yourself like a boss. I think the context of how I think about human interactions of like knowing someone mutual. It's like, oh my God, if you mentioned someone that I met 3 years ago that I'm close with, I'd be like, oh my God, like tell me more. How'd you know him? It just creates that intimacy. Same thing when you're reaching out to someone on social media, on Instagram. And I think over the years, like that compounds where I was super interested in like Wiz Khalifa and his whole group Taylor Gang.
Baby.
Yeah, Taylor Gang was like super influential in like my youthful years of music. I loved Wiz. So one of his people, and like his VIP manager, his name's Ludi Boy, and I ended up reaching out to him, I think 2019, 2020, had him on the podcast because I was genuinely interested in him. That led to him posting it, and then his manager, Wiz Khalifa's manager, Will Dezombach, who's the CEO of Taylor Gang, ended up liking that post that Ludi posted, right? Because they're, you know, good friends and part of the, like, they're obviously in Taylor Gang. I reached out to Will. I was like, oh, I just had Ludi on the show. Would love to have you on. Great. Boom. Then Will was on the show. Long story short, Will ended up becoming an investor in Mediakits, my last company, from the podcast. And I always like to say this as a fun fact. We had 37 angel investors in Mediakits. We raised just over $1 million for the company, and almost 90% of the investors were previous guests of the podcast. So like people that I had genuine relationships with. But I say that because when you look at like the dots connecting from like my
injury,
well, not like the injury, but also like interviewing Ludi Boy from Taylor Gang, then Will interviewed, then he invested, then Wiz Khalifa became a partner in Mediakits and performed at a launch party. So it was like this domino effect of like, my intention wasn't, can I interview this person to have Wiz at a launch party one day? It was like, I'm genuinely interested in this human and this person, but the compound effect of, you know, not looking to get something from someone, but being genuinely interested in them kind of relates to the, again, like the point of having context of the situation, and kind of goes back to like what this Bobby Althoff, incredible podcast. Yeah. Same thing with her, at least to the story that I've heard is, I was telling you before, she interviewed this comedian. She posted on TikTok like, hey, I'm starting a podcast. I'll pay someone $300 to get me a cool guest. That's all she said. She had a big TikTok following, so she did that. She got this comedian on the show. Wow. Then this comedian was like, oh, you should interview this guy, Funny Marco, who is this hilarious comedian. I'm actually working on getting him on my show. But she interviewed Funny Marco. They had a hilarious discussion.
You should probably give Funny Marco one of your like skincare routines.
Why?
Because he needs it.
Does he actually?
Yeah, dude. Look at his face.
That's hilarious.
We'll talk about it in the podcast.
I gotta look it up.
Is that like you want him to know that? You should tag him on that.
Hashtag. Come on,
I gotta look at
this.
He's
He's cool, man.
No, but he's really hilarious.
Funny.
But then they posted, and then Drake saw that interview, and then Drake liked it and followed Bobby Althoff, and supposedly she just reached out and said, "Want to come on the podcast?" Since he followed her, he saw it, and he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." 3 days later, she's interviewing Drake, gets 10 million views, and then the snowball effect. So it's like,
yes,
the context
it's
there
light
is
work after that.
It's just it's. You know, it's hard to replicate that level of podcasting success, but the point is, she just, you know, she put in the reps, but it also there was like this magical element of like a Rick Ross or a Larry King of just capitalizing on a moment by just by just putting it out there. And,
so speaking of, how'd you land that Larry King interview?
That was a domino effect too, man. It was, I interviewed Tillman Fertitta, who's the owner of the Rockets and like billionaire restaurateur, Mastros, all this stuff. He was promoting a book that my good friend Michael Gruen was helping promote, and he's like, hey, you want to have Tillman Fertitta on the show? I'm like, absolutely. And interviewed Tillman, and through what was it? Interviewed Tillman, did that. Tillman invited people that helped promote his book to Mastro's Beverly Hills for a dinner of like the book launch party. And at that dinner is where I met Chance King. And it wasn't even that I sat next to him, but my good friend, business partner, Kieran sat next to him. Everyone was going around introducing themselves. And Tillman said, Chance, you know, it was such a pleasure being on your father's show today. Tillman was on the Larry King show. Such a pleasure being on your dad's show today. Give him my best regards. And I'm like, oh, like that's Chance King, Larry King's son. And the crazy moment is not only that, but in between meeting Chance that night and interviewing Larry King, it was like October to December. And probably a week after I meet Larry King's son, this is the greatest part. I'm not living in LA yet, but I'm in Century City with Jacqueline, and I'm about to leave the mall at the Century City Mall. Larry King rolls around the corner in his wheelchair. Like a week after I meet his son. And you know, you have that split second of like, do I go up to him? He's with two people. Like he's, you know, I don't want to disrupt his time. It's late. He's with two people.
We just had dinner with his son last week.
Yeah, but then I'm like, context, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't just go up and say, oh, nice to meet you. I mean, maybe I would for sure if it's because I love his work. But go up to him like, Larry, it's such a pleasure to meet you. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say I met your son Chance last week. I had a dinner with Tillman. Just wanted to say hello. He chats for a minute or so, and boom, that's that. And it just sort of expedited that relationship where I'm like, oh, Chance, I ran into your father, gave it some time. And I simply asked him, like, it'd be such a pleasure to have your father on the show. I'm typically not the one to ask for that so early in a relationship, but for me, it was like, I wanted to interview him, and I appreciate his work so much. He's older, right? He's 87 at the time. Granted, like, you don't know, we all don't have a period for how long we'll be here, but when you look at someone like Larry, I know there was a time frame, and ended up interviewing him December 10th, 2019. You were there that day, and it was just sort of like this domino effect of Tillman and the dinner, and then running into him at the mall, and then asking, and then Chance saying, hey, next time you're in LA, let me know, a little heads up, and we'll do it, and got it done.
That's so dope, man. That's so dope. So I was looking, and I noticed you have 3 shows.
I have 2 podcasts. One's called Questions that is not officially out yet, and then Casey Adams Show.
Okay. And what is Listener FM?
Larry's
That's
here. Could you open
a
up?
software
Larry's here. Could you open up?
Oh.
software company
Okay.
that I launched.
And then what's Blue
Like
Wire?
early.
Blue Wire is the podcast network that I'm a part of.
Oh, nice.
So,
Dude,
I
I
just
gotta
run Blue-
introduce you to the next guest. He actually runs a chain of hotels.
let's go.
Yeah, his name is Larry. Like, it would be super sick for you guys to meet.
Larry Absolutely.
King? Well,
No.
Too soon.
Rolls in a wheelchair.
Larry's problem, bro. No, but you know, it's crazy. So, what's up, Larry?
no way.
Yeah. It's freaking hilarious.
Crazy.
But yeah, no, that's crazy because like I remember even when you hit me up for it, you were like, you were like, hey Adam, like I need help like filming this whole thing. I got Larry. I'm like, what the? Yeah, I'm there. Like, I don't
For
even
sure.
care. You know, we were just so you know that was definitely kind of like one heck of an experience.
For sure.
What's
man.
up, Larry? We'll be with you in like 5 minutes, man. We're just wrapping up. But anyway, Casey, though, I appreciate you, man. Like, where can people like find you? I mean, it's crazy how fast time always flies on every
know.
episode.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's been like an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I only have one question.
Yeah.
My last question I wanted to ask. You did have that quote that you mentioned earlier, that from all the different people that you've interviewed so far, they all kind of have like one similar thing where it's they simply keep going and never quit, right? Obviously very profound. But what else is another gem that you've derived from talking to so many people?
I love that question. No one's ever asked the extra step. You know, I kind of going off of the keep going and never quit mentality, right? I've had 400 people on the show, from Larry King to Elon Musk's mom and all these influential
When's
people.
Elon Musk hopping on, bro?
We'll get him one day for sure. Hopefully it's just
Interesting guy,
on
man.
X. But no, I think it's, yes, they keep going. They never quit. But I don't want to say this. They're truly committed to what they're doing. And that commitment may change, right? Like when you look at an idea in a business, the business you start today, especially in tech, it will be completely different than when it actually matures and gets to the company that it is, right? Like I interviewed the founder of Twitch, and it was Justin TV, and it was just a live something. Like he took out his phone and he was just vlogging on Justin TV, and then that turned into Twitch, and then gamers latched on, and it was like, oh, we don't want to build a YouTube, we just want to be a streaming platform. But throughout Justin TV and the whole transition of the brands, they were so committed to that version of whatever it is they do, where I think it's the same with everyone, where Andy Frisella, when he has that one vitamin shop that he doesn't have supply chains in a 300,000 square foot facility, he's committed to that at the time, which is like his everything. But that same level of commitment is still today in this, massive organization. So yes, they keep going, they never quit, but they're just so committed to the current mission that they are in and day out. And I think that's very prevalent. Even, for someone like Elon, and when I interviewed his mom, I'm asking her about like, what were some of the early influences on Elon and how did they think about it? And I interviewed his sister as well, and I asked similar questions, not to make it about Elon, but just to hear about the sibling dynamic. And it's just that same thing. Like he wasn't committed to rockets when he was building Zip2 and like breaking into the internet and launching PayPal. That commitment is so strong for the present. Yes, you may have these future plans and visions like we all do, but that commitment level needs to be 100%.
That's dope.
I love it, man. We should do like a mic drop. But Casey, where can people find you, bro, on social media?
Yeah, I mean, everywhere. My Instagram is just at Casey. That's the best place to find me. And then the podcast is the Casey Adams Show.
Oh, you got
and
that
then
user tag. I remember. You were
Yeah.
Casey Adams, huh?
I used to be Casey Adams 1. Now it's just at Casey on Instagram.
Fire.
So CASEY.
You got a plug to get some fire at signs, or
Dude, if you ever want to add, just keep reaching out to the people that own the page if they're active, and just it took me 3 years to get that username back and forth with the guy, and then finally
you
got
for
it.
Or?
Yeah.
That's what the back and forth is for.
The negotiation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's
3 year
crazy,
negotiation
man.
for sure.
Well, I appreciate you for hopping on, brother. This has been
Absolutely.
a blast. I know you're about to go see my boy Omar, so
Yeah.
definitely enjoy your time. Are you in OC
Appreciate it.
at all, like usually? or-
Usually once a month. I
Yeah?
try to get down here.
That's
Yeah.
cool, man. We should
So-
get dinner next time you're down here. Then
For
we'll
sure.
do something. But
Absolutely.
any
Thank you so
final
much.
questions,
Hell
boys?
yeah, dude. Let's flip in. Let's hang out. Let's do something, man.
Absolutely.
This
Let's
was really
run
fun.
it.
Thanks so
Really
much
dope.
for having me
Yeah.
on.
Hell
This
yeah,
is great.
absolutely.
Casey,
man.
thank you, man. Appreciate you,
Of
bro.
course, brother. Thank
Sweet.
you.